Greetings and welcome back to my channel, World War II Books Where to Start. I'm your host, Herbert Ernst Karl Fromm, better known by my pseudonym. Can you figure out who I am in reality? I took that pseudonym during the war as a cover-up, but I kept it after the war because I wanted to get famous. Alright, today I like to look at Germany in microcosm and Europe in the macro and the immediate to intermediate post-war period ending about 1955. So I've done a video on before the war stuff, and it's my first venture into post-war stuff. Going to kind of arbitrarily cut this off, normally like 49, because that's straight up Cold War / Korea, and that's kind of getting out of my ballywick for my main area interest. But two of the books kind of go to 55 here, so we'll just kind of stretch parameters a little bit. And I think I've got a pretty good lineup for today, although the first one's a wee bit wobbly. So let's hit the book, shall we? All right, let's start off with After Hitler by Michael Jones from 2014, 400 pages total. I was a bit put off by the first two chapters in this thing. They are all over the place, and there's no excuse for this. You gotta set the bedrock for your intro, right? To get the readers into it, but it's kind of weeble wobbly, zinga zanga doodle all over the place. It's a poor place setting for sitting down to dinner. It really is. There's an extremely unnecessary recitation of the course of the war. And this is a growing pet peeve of mine, as you may be able to tell. Authors that don't know their audience. The course of the war, if a newbie picks this book up by chance, could be handled by a table at the start of the book listing major events and their dates as a preamble. That's all you need. Everyone's here for what comes after Hitler. Like, hey, the title of the book. Not what happened when he was alive and kicking. So he also treats Soviet intentions and geopolitical goals with tender, loving care and almost wide-eyed innocence. Is that perhaps pandering to a Russian audience or trying to make it Euro-friendly and an attempt at non-bias? Or that, I should say, non-biased in today's sense, where non-biased means you don't pick on me because it's unfair. I'm not really sure, but it certainly feels wrong-headed. I was captivated by the Battle of Breslau and the Saga of the Cap Arcona, both of which I need dedicated books on. And as a sidebar, the sinking of both of Wilhelm Gustloff and the Cap Arcona are kind of well known at this point. But there was another ship sunk with massive losses, the motor vessel Goya, G-O-Y-A, which ended up suffering about 5,000 people dying in her sinking. And I could find virtually nothing on. I mean, I found a couple articles in German, and that's about it. It doesn't appear that anyone's done a dedicated book on the Goya, although there are people who have done dedicated books on Gustloff and Cap Arcona. So I'm kind of lost there. It's like the stepchild that no one talks about. It's weird. Everyone wants to talk about Titanic, and now Gustloff is better known than it was in the past, and Arcona's kind of getting some press now. But old Goya is still out there in the wilderness, unresearched. So it's kind of a shame. A story needs to be told. So Patton's story and the unraveling of his mind once the bullets stop is intriguing. A man who's achieved every goal in his life that he set out for himself, and now he's not sure what could fill the void except more war, and he's still in his late middle age for that time and place. Late middle age today, approaching 60, is still in the prime of middle age. He doesn't deal with it well, of course. A cruel defeat and a life full of victories. We got Monty being Monty all the time, and I can't help him but view him through an American lens. I understand the Brits still revere him and think he's the cat's meow, but I just can't see it on this side of the road. And this leads into the 2 or 3 or 4 surrenders, if you count Italy's surrender, that dominate a good chunk of the book. It's belabored, even if right in the wheelhouse of the book's premise, and I certainly felt that he needed to take the axe to the manuscript here and be most severe with the length he deals with each of these surrenders and clean it up. He really needed to clean it up. It was really plotting and pondering. But the biggest swing and a miss, where's Chuck? Has anyone seen Charles de Gaulle, of whom an airport will be named for him and later an aircraft carrier? The guy's pretty famous. He's pretty well known, and he's still a big hitter in Europe at this point. What the heck's going on in France? Where's Chuck at the end of the war? Why is he not mentioned at all? I looked in the bibliography, or sorry, the index, just to make sure I hadn't skimmed over it. There's not a single de Gaulle reference. There's stuff going on in Paris. I guarantee there is in immediate 10 days. And de Gaulle is demanding a place at the table for peace talks and an occupation zone. So why is de Gaulle not here? That's a big miss. This is my second reading because I felt I needed to give it a second chance because I was kind of with it after the first reading. But upon further review, the call on the field stands. 2 stars. I will say, though, this is from a rather jaundiced point of view. After all, I've been reading about the war on and off since about 1979. If you're new and curious and unfamiliar with this territory, it could very well be a good point of introduction for the immediate snapshot of when the war ended, because it's just 10 days. But for seasoned page warriors, however, the harmony is rather flat and a beat behind the rhythm. 1, 2, and a 2, and a 1, and a 2, and a 1, and a 2. That's After Hitler by Michael Jones. All right, next up, Aftermath by Harold Yaner from 2019. 400 pages total. And one thing I forgot to mention with the After Hitler book, the photo section is fairly representative. There's obligatory iconic photographs, and there's some other stuff that is not so well known or I hadn't seen. Though it's a mixed bag there. It's okay, it's decent, not great. Harold Yaner's 400 pages total, 2019. The life and the fallout of the Third Reich, 45 to 55. So fair warning here, folks, if you don't like sociology mixed with your history, you need not go any further with what I'm about to say. Just skip a doodle to the next one. This is a heavy dose of sociology used to assist in the explanation of what West Germany primarily experienced in the 10 years following the end of the war. He does not indulge in sociological terminology, however, nor soak the writing in various studies done on controlled populations regarding surveys of certain questions. So if you have worries on that score, put them aside. It's not like a sociological textbook you would read in college, but he's a sociologist, I think, by training, and so it permeates the book, but I didn't find it to be off-putting at all. And I mean, really, I was really impressed. I found him to be engaging and very readable. And this is in translation, mind you. This is impressive. I thought it flowed very well. So we start off with the concept of 0 hour or Stunde Null in Germany. The idea that after the surrender, history stopped and took a heartbeat and then started over, with a new nation popped out of the thin void to take up the space where the other Germany had vanished, and all the emotional and mental freight that idea involves. The self-pity of the Germans digging themselves out of the ruins, simply scavenging to survive each day for the good part of the first 2 post-war years. Whatever happened before really didn't matter to most of these people. When you're starving and living in cellars, or you're living out of doors, you're right next door to being a caveman, and just about the only thing that matters to you is when you can eat your next meal. And what the heck is that going to be? I don't really care as long as something's being consumed. The whole of Western and some of Europe, Eastern Europe, was poised on the edge of famine in the first 2 years after the war. Excepting the neutrals, of course, their situations were not always optimal. The Americans and Brits felt compelled to not let them starve, which was a relatively small strain on America, but engendered further hardship in Britain. Not a fun time for anyone. And to put that in context for the Americans, of course, we had the UNRAA, or RRA, the UNRWA assistance, and other food drops done by the military. But that was a political hot potato in the States, because Republicans don't like giving stuff away for free. They never do. And they complained about corruption and ulterior motives in UNRWA, and thought it was possibly communist linked. They were suddenly alive to the threat of communism, and the idea of just simple charity to starving Europeans did not go down well. So that was fought tooth and nail, appropriations for UNRWA, and it's not a good look for America, but that's what happened. So Yaner will go over the legend of the Rebel women and the genre of Rebel movies, which is kind of a new concept to me, and I've seen a few since I finished this book. It's a subgenre of what for me, a film noir, but it's got the benefit of being filmed in the ruins of the Reich, and which is a unique opportunity for a filmmaker, of course, where you don't have to fake anything on a set for scenery and backdrop. Some of that stuff's pretty interesting. The section on DPs is very good. And we got Polish Jews that don't want to go home. Eastern Jews want to emigrate to Palestine. The Soviets are demanding everyone that was a citizen of theirs or belonged to, say, Poland or one of their other territories they're going to occupy should come on home. They're demanding it. So DP camps remain horrible places, often for years. And many times these camps were former German concentration camps, of course, because there's simply nowhere else left standing that has the capacity to house such numbers of people. The Germans are very naturally very put out by having so many thousands of DPs among them, forced on them. In many instances, with all the culture clash and culture shock associated with such forced mixing. And we're not just talking about DPs that were former slave laborers. We're talking about DPs that are being forced out of Poland, that are German, or Volksdeutsche, or maybe German and Poles mixed that were forced out by Poland and Czechoslovakia and other Eastern nations. It's all a mess. They're all migrating to the Reich, and all the slave laborers are trying to migrate home to their former countries that are now occupied by the Soviets. It's a mess. There's millions of people on the road with very little to eat, and very few places to stay. So it's an unhappy postscript to the immediate post-war existence. Let's see, where am I? So okay, so this includes these Prussians as well as Germans forced out of territory given over to Poland with a shift of borders as Stalin demanded for Poland, i.e. the restoration basically of the Curzon line, and shift everything west from there for Poland. The locals that these people get forced onto do not take the situation well. We got Catholic versus Protestant stuff, not just language issues or culture, but the old religion. You talk about the country that had the 30 Years' War over Protestantism versus Catholicism. We've got priests raging from pulpits about these invaders from the east. Farmers had the pick of the litter here, literally. They could sometimes pick and choose who they took in as men for working on the farm, and attractive women topped the list of people they wanted to live on their farms. I bet you can't guess why. Spoils of war. Some of the POWs who were supposed to skedaddle back to Mother Russia are naturally afraid to do so, and one particular group puts their collective feet down and refuses in absolute terms. There's a mass suicide in their camp barracks, fate which is surely not much different than what would have greeted them had they gone home and obeyed the summons. Interestingly, though, he does neglect the experience of the Cossacks in the British area of occupation that were forcibly sent home, both by the Brits and the U.S., and a certainly unflattering episode for our humanitarian instincts. We obeyed the letter of the law that was agreed, and we forcibly deported the Cossacks back home. But that's kind of outside the remit of the German experience here, so I think that's why the Cossack experience episode is not mentioned here. On a lighter note, there is the saga of Virginia Dankeschön, the Americanized designation for venereal disease given to the women who wanted to fraternize, rules be damned. There's no men there. There's no men in post-war Germany. Very few men of a marriageable age. Most of them are staggering home from the front, or maybe in the Rhineland Meadow prison camps, or they're being shuffled off to Russia for forced labor, or they come home mutilated, missing limbs, missing eyes, missing arms, etc. And so the source of eligible men is the occupiers. And, there was originally the non-fraternization policy, which kind of melted over time. Viewed today through the disapproving glare of presentism and peacetime morality, it kind of looks sordid and trashy, all these girls just wanting to have a good time and go out with a man. But these are people trying to live normal civilian lives again and get away from the idea of, I'm starving today, can I go out and have a little fun instead? So if you look at it through today's prism, it's going to look a little But it's a different world back then, entirely different world. So there's also rationing and near starvation, as mentioned, to contend with. 1,550 calories a day might have been the official ration for folks, but in the reality in the breadline was 800 calories was all you could reckon with. Supply lines never being guaranteed to work. Never mind the pilfering for the black market, the non-stop theft from aid convoys, and German farmers holding onto their produce back from holding it back from the market because they could get better prices if starving people came to them in the countryside. They can make a mint off that stuff. Hey, trade my jewelry and trade my furniture and trade my precious rugs and tapestries from family heirlooms from the 1600s for a loaf of bread and some bacon. Yeah, that stuff happened. There's no sense of nationhood or camaraderie now. The old Third Reich's glue, it's gone. Or the impulse to do what's right, or when exploitation can serve their base instincts better. Strangely enough, there did develop a code of ethics that bracketed what was permissible in stealing and organizing, and what was out of bounds even for starving people. The black market is seen as not only as inevitable in such a destroyed society, but necessary, Yaner argues. He walks us through how the black markets worked in cities as well as in the countryside. And it makes you think of some of the cartoonish images of the guy with a trench coat with, whole blanketed watches hanging down that was kind of a thing in the decades past. But this is kind of the origin of it. There was a great chapter on Wolfsburg and the birth of the Volkswagen Corporation, both pre-war and post-war. That is really fascinating. There's a female test pilot, not named Hannah Reich, Beata Jussa, and her early days in the porn and sex ed empire. She kind of pioneered that in Germany. The disgust and eye rolling over denazification and the silly Allied questionnaire, which I found to be the weakest chapter, followed closely by the revival of artistic endeavors and, of all things, furniture styles involving kidney-shaped tables was a thing. And he goes on and on about it for a while. I just didn't get it. And that was kind of shaped and sponsored by the CIA of all organizations, which had Arthur Kessler, the novelist, working for them at the time. It's really bizarre. It's not well done. And I didn't quite get the relevance of post-war furniture shapes to defining New Germany. That was a swing and a miss for me. The final chapter here involves the guilt or lack thereof in the Germans, their lack of shame, they're playing the victim and trivializing the part that Germany played in the war. East Germany not included. Nope, that's sold separately. There's a tiny bit about the East here, but clearly his study is centered on the West. That's where his strength is. It's absolutely impressive. No way around it. No way I'm not giving it 5 stars. That's Aftermath by Harold Yander. I should say the photos are singles dotted throughout the book, and they are well placed and well done, and there's a lot you haven't seen before, and pretty illustrative of the concept here. So once again, 5 stars. Don't miss this one. Don't sleep on this. Aftermath by Harold Yander. Okay, and then moving on, we have Savage Continent, Europe, in the Aftermath of World War II by Keith Lowe. This is from 2016, 370 pages, main body. Going to feel a bit longer than that. There's a lot of death and destruction here, non-stop. It's going to feel a lot longer than 370, but it's well worth the time invested here, expanding on the idea of just Germany's existence in the 10 years following the end of the war. Keith Lowe goes on continent-wide, encompasses roughly the same time frame as Yander does, depending on the country, sometimes coming back to a particular nation, maybe a second time to add some stuff in. At the risk of melodrama here, this is a book where you pick it up and the blood more or less drips from the pages as soon as you open it up. You may not feel that when there's no vibes coming off when you first pick it up. But after a while, it's like, man, these pages are just soaked in blood. It's amazing. Perhaps I'll do a Grimace Books list that I've ever read. If I do at some point, that's definitely going to make the list. So when the shooting stopped, the murders began. That would be a good blurb for the back cover of this one, and it would be accurate. Revenge, forced migration, deportation, ethnic cleansing, denazification, purging collaborators, civil wars, communist takeovers, mass rape on a continental-wide scale, state-sponsored torture and execution. All this and more for 90% of the book. He doesn't sugarcoat anything in the aspect of Europe's experience after the war, and it could likely have been written an entire book about each country's post-war conditions. He got a series of 10 on this. It's almost all grim. There's very little positive to take away from this study, so you have to want to know. You really have to want to know to get into this one. If there's anyone missing here, I think it's Finland. He just kind of ignores them, and maybe Denmark. Every other nation that was a combatant or occupied in Europe, save Britain, gets the treatment here. Britain ostensibly being a winner in the war as well as a continuing problem for Europe, not a solution. Think Greece when I say that. We're going to kick it off with starvation and stealing, hunger and combatant and neutral nations, a ubiquity of experience all over the continent, but most harshly felt during the war in Greece. Which is saying something. If it was worse or the same as the siege of Leningrad. Here we get the first of several familiar anecdotes. If you've rolled around the war for long enough, you'll recognize this. First among them here, the tale of the great militiamen, or they might have been partisans, playing a game of football with the severed head of one of their victims. There follows a Norman Lewis-related tale of the women in Italy giving away their bodies for cans of food in Naples, and one of America's soldiers' public performance of this shameless act for the amusement and guffaws of his fellow soldiers. Shortly after that, the tale of the German women tied to the bumpers of the cars in East Prussia by Soviet soldiers and pulled apart. A new kind of game of drawing and quartering for a new century, which leads us to the subject of late war rape. And it, like hunger, its ubiquity all across the continent, wherever troops liberated territory, rape followed inevitably, and not just in the Soviet zones either, although they are the all-stars of that particular crime. No getting around that. Striving not to be outdone, of course, though. The tales of Moroccan troops and their depredations in Italy and Germany, and the locals thought if they were awful, then they considered the Sahara tribesmen that followed them to be even worse. But the worst tale I ever heard of this type concerns a woman in Pomerania, a young mother, and you might have seen this. I've run across it once or twice before. This is like the flagship experience here. A young woman first raped and then hanged alongside her husband in a hayloft while her children are strangled beneath her feet. The husband is hanged correctly, but she was not. She was cut down later by Polish civilians who wandered along and asked her who had done this. When she says it was Russians, they beat the snot out of her just cause. So she wanders off to a pool or a creek nearby and tries to drown herself, but she can't quite go through with it. So she goes looking for a friend that lives nearby and ends up opening the door into an apartment full of Russian soldiers, and they proceed to tear her apart and then kick her senseless. This is just 50-some pages into the book, and I just want to illustrate what you're getting into graphically, if you really want to explore this one. And if you think he's just starting with some shock and awe to paralyze your brain and things are going to settle down for a little bit, you're absolutely wrong. So overall, from 42 to 45, the American Armed Forces had a reported total of some 17,000 cases of rape. This figure is awful, but consider what the numbers were likely to have been in the Soviet zone just for 45. And I think you can easily grok why the focus of attention for bad behavior during liberation has always been glued to the Ivans and their race towards Berlin. But for a bit of comic relief here, we're going to get the story out of Hanover, where a store full of doorknobs was looted by a crazed mob. So they got the rumor that there was something really valuable in the store. Let's go check it out. And you got 100 or more people running down the street, yammering and screaming. They break into this place, and it's a doorknob store, a doorknob factory. So they're all kicking and pulling each other's hair out and kicking their teeth out over doorknobs. And they're running down the street, hands full of doorknobs. That had to be, man, it's just an interesting sight to see. Then we get some details about the Rheinslager and the Germans put behind the wire in the summer of 45, and their death rates, their filthy conditions on the sky without latrines or blankets or any kind of viable water supply. The image of men sleeping in shallow lakes of piss will never leave my head, I don't think. Estimates of death here run to about 5,000 men all told. Most of these camps were broken up by 46, but that's where we kept the majority of these guys, a couple million men, a few million men, a lot of million men, because we didn't have anywhere else to put them. Outdoors they were, until we could kind of sift them and sort them for SS and bad guys. But from here we go outside of Germany and look at all the revenge upon the Germans as they're being forcibly removed. Poland first. The Poles set up their own concentration camps, not as places for DPs to shelter until they could be moved out, but as punishment camps along the lines of what the SS did to Poles, Jews, and Gentile alike. It's straight revenge stuff here, and the camp commanders and most of their cronies are never held to account for what they did here. Zagoda, a former satellite camp Auschwitz, and its commander Solomon Morel are the features here for starters. Then it moves on to Lambsdorff, run by, murder this guy's name, Czesław Gaborski. I know I'm not anywhere close on Polish pronunciation. And some of the punishments here rival, if not outstrip anything, and I mean anything the SS had done in Poland or the Soviet Union. It's page 139 of my Kindle edition if you want to check that. Mind you, these are not German soldiers disarmed and imprisoned. These are German civilians, either settlers or Volksdeutsche, who are going to be forcibly removed to the new borders of Germany if they survive this sadistic round of torture first. But if you're thinking, wait a second, I remember this one story about babies being thrown alive into the ovens of Auschwitz. How can anyone else be that bad or worse? Well, there are folks soaked in gasoline and set on fire all over Europe for revenge. There were people herded into barns and churches and killed with hand grenades, and sadistic hangings, crucifixions, the aforementioned drawing and quartering. Creative ways to murder people are not copyright protected, and there are a lot of creative license here all over Europe as they found new ways to do people in, or creative ways. Shifting from these events to what he calls the politics of numbers. He's going to get into the historiography of the stats of the dead and who manipulates these stats for what reasons, i.e. who gets to wear the mantle of victimhood in this regard, Poles or Germans, and why it matters who holds the high ground in a finger-pointing exercise over crimes against humanity and who the bigger villain is. The numbers game in various countries will rise again and again, not just about finger-pointing, but the importance of knowing how many were actually killed in each country, and as far as can be ascertained, why they had to be murdered in this massive wave of violence and retaliation that went on for years. There's a matter of revenge upon the Germans, not just in Poland, but Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia as well. And from these horror stories, they're every bit as bloody as what I've just related. But from external enemies, is then going to turn to internal enemies and civil wars, struggles for power. People who get to call themselves resistance fighters or partisan fighters, or a liberator or a communist, and who gets branded as a fascist, or worst of all, collaborator. Who pins those tails on which donkeys, and how many donkeys then suffer torture, humiliation, and very frequently murder. The horizontal collaborators in France, Belgium, and Holland are humiliated and treated shabbily, some for the remainder of their lives, but the violence they suffer is usually temporary. Violence in other countries like Italy, Greece, Croatia, and Serbia, it goes on and on and on. We got arbitrary shootings and captives forced to exhume graves of mass murder victims before these captives are then shot in turn. We got draconian laws passed against Germans remaining in liberated countries just because they're Germans. We got the unwanted bastard children of German soldiers left behind in Norway, France, and Belgium, and elsewhere that bear the stigma of their fathers' names for the rest of their lives. Western European nations, where the Nazi occupation fell the lightest, are the quickest to get their retaliations and trials over with, to denazify their legal and political systems with some alacrity and get on with the grim business of setting their countries to some kind of rights. Although the after effects seem to have lasted longest in France of all these Western European nations. Italy's experience is one of residual feudalism versus peasant farmers who thought for once and all they might get out from under the yoke of a top-heavy system that has oppressed them, whatever the form of government, for centuries. Communists in Italy chose to go the route of legality through the ballot box, thinking that winning over peasants might get them into power and deflect the wrath of the Western allies, but they failed to convert these hopes to results. The Allies kind of squashed them, retaining fascists in local positions of authority for lack of manpower, lack of concern, or lack of any time to do it themselves, and no desire to vet the local population for better leaders, as well as putting down some peasant revolts that had broken out in southern Italy, where some small independent republics had been declared. And then there's Greece. Despite Churchill wringing control of influence for that country out of Stalin with his dirty paper, dirty note trick when he went to meet Stalin in 44, he bungles the liberation of Greece anyway in the fall of 44, well before the end of the war. The situation is so complex that it may have been no way to set Greece to rights without being about as brutal as the Germans. But what they do manage to do with insisting on bringing back the king, because Churchill's a staunch monarchist, is to just about guarantee a civil war will occur. Critics of Churchill, both amateur and professional, like to drill down on the war guarantee to Poland and the Bengal famine as the primary sticking points for why he shouldn't be considered a great leader of the 20th century, but hardly any of them ever know anything about what happened in Greece or the Dodecanese campaign that was totally unnecessary in 44 to focus on ruining his reputation. They just kind of ignore it. And I should also say as a sidebar that the British cry that we don't have enough infantrymen to help out more in the Northwest European campaign, Normandy, and going towards Germany in 44 is definitely shown out to be a false narrative here. They've got men to waste on Greece and the Dodecanese nonsense, but they can't put more reinforcements into Normandy. It doesn't add up, man. So that's just sidebar there. I should stop here. It's an awful lot, but there's more, as you may well guess. There's a concluding chapter on how we see these events and memorialize them through ceremonies and films and books, and for the most part as a Western audience. Also, we filter through a Cold War lens. That particular lens is going to be obsolete soon, though, as that generation ages out. And for the follow-on generations who didn't live through it, their own chance to look back at this mid-century madness is going to be filtered through different lenses, a different viewpoint and aspect altogether, and how they take to it is anyone's guess. As you can surmise, I'm deeply impressed with this thing and its scope, its determination to tell the ugliness unvarnished, not dumbed down, and all its brutality. And the immediate post-wars in Europe. On a 5-star rating system, this is easily a 7. I've run this thing pretty long here, so I'll save the movie and documentary stuff for a follow-on video. I'm rock solid certain that at least one of these will get your interest here, and maybe all of them. They're all, well, 2 out of 3 are great. The first one I have obviously a lot of reservations about. And if you haven't guessed yet, my pseudonym is Willy Brandt, Mayor of Berlin and future Chancellor of Western Germany. So until next time, happy reading.